shocks, etc. We've also entered into the filtration market, where we are developing fabrics that help keep the environment clean, that filter the gas exhausts from industrial manufacturing. We're making composite fabrics that make building and construction much lighter, so fabrics that can sort of make the concrete in the walls less, or stabilize roads, or make false ceilings, or build the bodies of trains. So fabrics can do wonderful things. So because India is going to need massive infrastructure growth, massive transportation growth, India is going to see transportation, public transportation coming to the fore. India is going to have more environmental legislation, more safety legislation. So we've decided to invest in these type of advanced materials fueled by our understanding of fabric. Another future initiative is sort of customization, mass customization in apparel. The Indian physique is, after a certain age, starts to become very difficult to manage from just ready-made clothing, because we tend to become slightly broader in the midsection, and so for a clientele that has odd body shapes, or for youngsters who want to make style statements, can we provide a backbone that allows you to customize things easily at a factory scale and do it for millions and millions of people, not only in India but across the globe. And that requires technology, that requires design, that requires the use of the web, all integrated as one. So e-commerce and customization is a major thing that Arvind is foraying in, and in the years to come you will see a lot from us on how do you customize apparel at large scales. One of the things that we've done is we've launched a customization brand called Create. So that's our story. So we went from being essentially a dhoti and sari manufacturer to a denim manufacturer to a modern fabric manufacturer to vertically integrated into garments to thinking about taking advantage of India's middle class and providing value to them, and then finally thinking about the future, India's infrastructure needs, India's young population wanting to look different, and at each of these sort of opportunities, a reinvention of who we are needs to take place to cater to those needs. So if I were to, in a nutshell, sort of summarize my entrepreneurial learning from being witness to this change, a few things, come to my mind, and I'd just like to share those few little nuggets that I gleaned of being witness to this whole process. I think entrepreneurship is very much about value rather than money. In this day and age where quarterly results define your success, it's very easy to sort of try and manage our bottom line. We could have very easily in the 70s or 80s taken a cost-driven approach where we would, like all the other mills that eventually died, keep trying to cut costs to compete. We chose to invest in something almost untried, very inherently risky, which paid off for us, and that's because we tried to create value. And at each of these steps, I don't think the consideration was profit maximization. It was how can we do something new that will create value for, and I think that's been the backbone of our success. Whereas the opposite, which can be seen in the meltdown of 2008, red line management, we used to call it in business school, where the maximum effort is on trying to demonstrate the best possible bottom line, led to behaviors that in the long run ended up destroying value. So I think as entrepreneurs, one has to think about value and not money, and there is significant difference between the two. There's something that I like to call the mind multiplier effect. And I think as successful people, one of our biggest drawbacks when one becomes successful is that we think that, we can do anything. And we tend to sort of keep investing in ourselves, ignoring the fact that no amount of individual ability can compromise the power of coordinated collective thinking. And a prime example has been, I've been able to see is delegation. I think one thing that we do extremely well at Arvind is delegation and co-opting people who are much smarter than ourselves. So, for example, to give you an example, a non-Arvind example, Kasturbai Lalbhai took it upon himself in the 50s, 60s and 70s to create world-class educational institutes. He was not an educator. He didn't even finish his 10th grade. And his ambition was to create, universities and schools that could rival the best in the world. And he did that by attracting, with his vision, some of the best minds of India to come and work on creating the concepts for these universities. He donated land, he brought people together, he articulated a vision, but it was a Dr. Vikram Sarabhai's and Maulankar Dada and all these very erudite people. He brought the best architects in the world, Louis Kahn for IIM, invited Corbusier to Ahmedabad, Balkrishna Doshi. So brought immensely capable people together. And sometimes it's very easy to focus on oneself and try and, put in, one's heart and soul into one does, but into one's venture. But it's equally important to see how, you can bring others to sort of multiply your own effectiveness in your businesses or ventures. So that's an important learning that I've had. That was, one of the key success factors to this reinvention story. Somebody mentioned it in the earlier sort of Q&A round, living with uncertainty. I think that's a very, very key lesson and trait to be successful. There was a period of 6 years where we as a family, a day didn't go by where we didn't think that tomorrow we'll be on the streets because of the indebtedness of the company. To be able to persevere through that dark period and yet fulfill, all the tasks that seem reasonably hopeless to the best of one's ability, is a rare skill. And I tip my hat off to the management of Arvind at that time that, saw the company through such a dark and hopeless period and didn't give up in the face of such uncertainty. To give an example of my own, I'm trying to build businesses in this advanced material space that I talked about, for which there are no markets in India. So it's for tomorrow's India that we are building today. And therefore there is a process of education, there's a process of getting new products first time to India or first time to the world, qualified for usage. And one day you are up on a high, the next day you are down in the dumps. So to be able to emotionally handle the ups and downs that will come with success and failure and all the everything in between, I think is a key prerequisite to being entrepreneurial. Passion, passion, passion. The slide speaks for itself. I think what drives entrepreneurs is energy, and if you have energy, I think half the battle is won. I think waking up in the morning and having that feeling that you want to go to work itself is enough to see you through, and something good will come of it. I've seen it time and time again that this quality is almost common in all the really successful people you see. You talk to them about what they're doing, and the passion will start pouring out from them in describing what they do, how they do it, etc. And just try it. Go to a successful person, ask him about what he's successful in, and you see the energy that is exuded from that person. And I think it's a wonderful thing to try and emulate. And something that Shailendra, the last thing I would like to leave you with is the realization that anybody can be an entrepreneur. So when one thinks of entrepreneurs, generally people think of very successful people who've had a lot of resources at their disposal. But some of the examples, and some people in the audience very rightly picked examples that were not the typical ones. Economists, social workers can also be entrepreneurial. So being entrepreneurial is more of an attitude. And there are many, many examples even at Arvind. For example, this cotton farms that have been globally recognized and got us membership. We were the first company to be invited on the board of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. That started because a researcher came and pitched an idea that we decided to back, and that researcher with his efforts built such a strong social network in the areas that we are working with cotton farmers, that the farmers, there are more and more farmers wanting to join each day. Their incomes have gone up 30 to 40%, and that was just built by no grand vision. It was built by a researcher who was earning 4 lakhs a year, and it's now been globally recognized. Mart, which is India's largest value apparel retail chain that Arvind started, was a disposal strategy for, we had brought Arrow, we had brought Flying Machine. At the end of the season, there was leftover inventory. So a group of young managers thought that let's open this disposal outlet kind of store, and that turned into India's largest value retail chain. So one doesn't have to, you don't even need to be the proprietor of the company to be entrepreneurial. One can be entrepreneurial in how he approaches any walk of life, as long as the key thing, you're seeing things that everybody sees, as Shailendra, that left quite an impression on me. But you do things in a different way, and you find the opportunity that nobody else saw. That was the gist of it, and I think that all of us can do. So I'm really encouraged by so many of you being interested in entrepreneurship, and please do not let resources or circumstances be a limiting factor to towards wanting to be entrepreneurial. Absolutely anybody can do it. So thank you very much for listening to my story. think we can have questions for both of us. I think we can field questions if there are any. I hope there are some.
I have one question. When you are taking the call of doing all these new businesses, the fiberglass, things like that, for which, demand is very uncertain, how do you mitigate the risks and make sure that you survive till that product comes out? Because now that you have become a conglomerate.
So there is a very complex, very comprehensive sort of capital allocation process at Arvind, because we are a conglomerate and there are, by God's grace, many successful businesses, many businesses vying for a limited, limited pot of capital. And so, as part of this exercise, each sort of business leader has to justify in terms of future potential, in terms of whether or not we've been as frugal as we could have, and in terms of risk mitigation, we need to justify why we need what funds for that particular project. So it's and the answer to your question is that you do it at a scale that is affordable. You would, if you're reasonably confident that an idea has legs, you can do it, but not at a scale that can impact the overall working of the company. So, we are essentially starting small. We're essentially not doing everything there is to do in the value chain, but only focusing on the parts that create the most value. We're doing it through partnerships. For example, many of these type of new ventures are joint ventures, where a good portion of the product is exported using the contacts of the joint venture partner in established markets. So that provides, the sort of cash flow to sort of incubate the India business, which is a pot of gold in the future, but today is very small. So we have several, strategies to risk mitigation, each, little different for each venture.
You're such a large organization. How do you identify what are the emerging, do you have a conscious process, a set of people who are constantly scanning opportunities? Because when you become so large, turning the ship around, turning the Titanic around is a difficult job. So how does that happen?
So there are two things that help us be nimble. I think Arvind is more a holding company. Each of the businesses is run as an individual business. So each division has a CEO, and it each has its, internally, though it's all consolidated to a shareholder, but internally each division is run like a separate company. There's very high degree of autonomy to each business leader. That helps each business remain nimble. So there's very little interference from, the corporate on how things, as long as those businesses work within very broadly defined boundaries of what you can and cannot do, and capital allocation. Most of the managerial function is sort of delegated at the business level. Also, for the new ventures, we have a central strategy team that is working with the board and with the individual businesses to come up with, the opportunities that will essentially be the future bets. So we classify our businesses into three buckets: the mature businesses that are essentially the cash cows, the growth businesses like brands and retail that are the valuation drivers, and then the future bets like advanced materials and e-commerce that will be the future.
So,
Good evening.
How important is the implication of theories when it comes to entrepreneurship? How important is theories, the theory which we studied in entrepreneurship when it comes to the practical aspects?
So theory is, I wouldn't say unimportant, it is important. So the basic theory, how to do a costing, how to read a balance sheet, how to understand, strategy principles, it's all important. But it's not sufficient. So the learning doesn't end with the theory. The theory is only the beginning, and then your application of those theories will teach you a lot more. But without those theories, you would be like a dry leaf in the wind. You won't have the direction. So to start, you need the theories. But as you go along implementing, you learn what theory is successful, and you develop your own theories also, because each one's context is different. Everybody operates in a different market, everybody has different challenges, everybody works with different kind of people. And it's my experience that the softer things become more and more important as you mature as a business, because HR, EQ, people management skills, a lot of management is about